Have you ever felt like the truth was hiding in plain sight? That the story we're told is only part of the story? From UFOs buried in forgotten deserts to strange experiments locked behind government vaults, tonight we're diving deep into the secrets they don't want you to know. This is not about wild speculation. These are real cases, declassified files, eyewitness testimony, leaked memos, carefully hidden until someone looked too close. So grab a blanket, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself. These are the most disturbing government cover-ups and conspiracies you've probably never heard of. And once you do, you'll never look at the world the same way again.
There are places in this world that are supposed to be sanctuaries, hospitals, clinics, universities, hallowed halls where science and compassion meet to heal the sick and mend the broken. They are built on a foundation of trust. We go to them in our most vulnerable moments, believing we are placing our lives and our minds in the hands of those who wish to help. But between 1957 and 1964, one such sanctuary, a respected university institute in Montreal, Canada, became the site of a terrifying secret. Behind the guise of pioneering psychiatric treatment, the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, funded a brilliant and ambitious doctor who sought to do the impossible, to erase a human mind and rebuild a personality from the rubble. The patients who walked through his doors seeking help for everyday struggles became unwitting test subjects in one of the most disturbing chapters of the Cold War's secret history. They thought they were being cured. In reality, their minds were being systematically destroyed. High on the slopes of Mount Royal in Montreal, Canada, stood the Allen Memorial Institute, a psychiatric facility affiliated with the prestigious McGill University. To the outside world, it was a beacon of modern mental health care. At its head was Dr. Donald E. Ewan Cameron, a figure of international renown. He was the former president of both the American and Canadian Psychiatric Associations, and later the first president of the World Psychiatric Association. When Dr. Cameron spoke, the world of psychiatry listened. And Dr. Cameron had a radical new theory. He believed that the key to curing mental illness was to first obliterate the sickness at its source. He called his method psychic driving. The goal was to de-pattern the brain, to shatter the existing personality and erase all memories associated with it. Once the mind was a clean slate, a blank canvas, he could then re-pattern it, rebuilding a new, healthy personality from scratch. It was an audacious, terrifying idea, and it caught the attention of the CIA. In the grip of Cold War paranoia, the CIA was desperately researching methods of psychological warfare and mind control under its infamous top-secret program, MKUltra. They were looking for ways to break enemy spies, to create assassins, to manipulate human behavior. Dr. Cameron's work was exactly what they were looking for. Through a front organization called the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology, the CIA began secretly funneling tens of thousands of dollars to Dr. Cameron's research in Montreal. Unsuspecting patients continued to arrive at the Allen Memorial Institute. They were not spies or soldiers. They were ordinary people. They were mothers suffering from postpartum depression, university students struggling with anxiety, people seeking help for bipolar disorder or nagging neuroses. They trusted the celebrated Dr. Cameron. They placed their lives in his hands, believing they were about to receive the best care in the world. Instead, they were led to the sleep room. What happened inside the sleep room was a methodical nightmare. Patients were put into drug-induced comas, kept unconscious for weeks, sometimes even months on end. While they were lost in this chemical fog, a speaker would be placed under their pillow. From it, a looped audio track would play, over and over, up to 500,000 times. It might be a simple phrase or a stream of Dr. Cameron's psychiatric theories, a disembodied voice drilling directly into their defenseless subconscious. But this was only one part of the depatterning process. The main tool was electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT. At the time, ECT was a standard, if controversial, treatment. A controlled jolt of electricity could often break a cycle of severe depression. But the treatment Dr. Cameron administered was anything but standard. He used the machine with brutal, overwhelming force. Patients were subjected to massive doses of electroshock, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, at a voltage 30 to 40 times the normal therapeutic amount. It was a violent, convulsive force designed not to heal, but to shatter. When the depatterning was complete, the patients would be woken, but they weren't cured. They were blank. They were shells of their former selves. Many had suffered catastrophic, permanent memory loss. They couldn't remember their own names or recognize their own faces in a mirror. They forgot how to speak, how to use a toilet, how to eat with a knife and fork. Husbands were presented with photographs of their own children and saw only the faces of strangers. Wives would listen as their spouses tearfully recounted their life together, hearing it all as if it were a story about someone else. They had been reduced to the state of an infant, their pasts, their loves, their very identities stolen from them. This, to Dr. Cameron, was success. This was the clean slate. For years, the horrific outcomes were dismissed as the unfortunate but sometimes necessary risks of experimental psychiatry. The victims and their families suffered in silence, their lives irrevocably broken. The truth did not begin to surface until the late 1970s. In the United States, landmark congressional investigations like the Church Committee and the Rockefeller Commission began to pull back the curtain on decades of CIA abuses. Buried deep within mountains of declassified documents, the connection was finally made. The CIA's MKUltra program had directly funded Dr. Cameron's work in Montreal. The revelation was a political bombshell. The fact that a U.S. intelligence agency had sponsored these monstrous human experiments on unsuspecting Canadian citizens on Canadian soil caused an international scandal. The CIA, in its defense, acknowledged the funding, but claimed they were unaware of the extreme and brutal nature of Dr. Cameron's methods, a claim many found difficult to believe. After a long and painful battle,
the Canadian government eventually offered a settlement of $100,000 to a fraction of the known victims, a sum that felt insulting to those whose entire lives had been taken from them. The Montreal Experiments stand as one of history's most chilling warnings. It is a story of what can happen when ambition and national security are allowed to completely eclipse medical ethics and basic human decency. It is a testament to the terrifying truth that sometimes the greatest monsters don't hide in the shadows. They stand in plain sight, wearing a doctor's coat and offering a helping hand.
There are events in history that are so horrific, they seem to defy understanding. They exist as a kind of shorthand for madness, a cautionary tale whispered with a shudder. But to truly understand them, we have to look past the monstrous ending and see the idealistic beginning. We have to understand that the most terrifying tragedies are often born from a beautiful dream. Before it became a byword for death, the People's Temple was, for many, a promise of life. It was a radical social experiment born in the turbulent heart of 20th century America. It offered a vision of a world without racism, a true rainbow family living in harmony and building a better society. It was sold as a utopian paradise. But this experiment, monitored and well known to government agencies, would end in a government-observed tragedy deep in the isolated jungles of Guyana, leaving over 900 bodies in its wake. This is the story of Jonestown. To understand the People's Temple, you have to understand the America of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. It was a nation fractured by racial inequality, social upheaval, and a deep-seated fear of nuclear annihilation. Into this world stepped a man named James Warren Jones, Jim Jones. To a world seeking answers, he seemed to have them all. He was a charismatic, fiery, and compassionate preacher who spoke a language of radical equality that was revolutionary for its time. His People's Temple was one of the first and most prominent, fully integrated churches in America. At a time when segregation was still a brutal reality, the temple was a place where black and white families sat together, ate together, and lived together as equals. Jones didn't just preach a gospel of the afterlife, he preached a gospel of social action here on earth. The temple ran soup kitchens, provided legal aid, and helped the poor and the elderly. For thousands of people, especially African Americans and idealistic young white progressives, the temple wasn't a cult. It was a sanctuary. It was a solution. It was a family that welcomed them when the world outside rejected them. Jim Jones was their protector, their advocate, their dad. As the temple grew in power and influence, moving from Indiana to Redwood Valley, California, the social experiment became more intense. Jones's vision of a socialist utopia required absolute commitment. Members were encouraged and then pressured to turn over everything to the temple, their paychecks, their homes, their life savings, and eventually even legal custody of their own children. It was all for the cause, a necessary sacrifice to build a new world. But inside this rainbow family, a dark transformation was taking place. The charismatic leader was becoming a demanding tyrant. Public meetings devolved into catharsis sessions, where members were forced to confess their perceived sins and were subjected to brutal public humiliation and severe physical punishments. A culture of fear and paranoia began to root take. Jones created a powerful us versus them mentality, convincing his followers that the outside world was a racist, fascist, apocalyptic nightmare, and that government forces like the CIA and FBI were actively trying to destroy them. Only inside the temple, under his protection, were they safe. As rumors of abuse and financial exploitation began to attract negative press, Jones initiated the final phase of his experiment. He announced a mass exodus, a flight from the corruption of America to a new promised land. They would build their own city, their own paradise, from scratch. It was called the People's Temple Agricultural Project, located in a remote, isolated tract of jungle in the South American nation of Guyana. The world would come to know it as Jonestown. To the followers, it was the ultimate realization of their dream. To Jones, it was the perfect cage. In Jonestown, the isolation was absolute. Members worked long, grueling hours in the hot, humid jungle, clearing land and farming. Their diets were meager, often just rice and beans. Their passports and medications were confiscated. They were surrounded by dense jungle and armed guards. Every aspect of their lives was controlled. And everywhere, at all hours of the day and night, the voice of Jim Jones was broadcast over the settlement's loudspeaker system. A constant stream of propaganda, paranoia, and indoctrination. The paradise had become a prison. Back in the United States, a group of concerned relatives began desperately trying to raise the alarm, telling stories of human rights abuses and people being held against their will. Their pleas for government intervention largely fell on deaf ears, as Jones had cultivated powerful political connections in California, who saw him as a key ally. But their efforts finally caught the attention of one man, California Congressman Lee Ryan. In November of 1978, Congressman Ryan flew to Guyana on a fact-finding mission. He was going to see Jonestown for himself. At first, he was treated to a carefully staged performance of happy, communal life. But soon, the facade began to crack. A note was secretly passed from a temple member to a journalist in Ryan's group. It read, "Please help us get out of Jonestown." That single piece of paper confirmed Ryan's worst fears. The next day, he announced that anyone who wished to leave with him was free to do so. A small, brave group of about 15 people stepped forward, publicly defecting from the temple. On November 18, 1978, Ryan's delegation and the defectors made their way to a remote local airstrip to board their small planes home. As they were preparing to leave, a tractor-trailer filled with Jones's elite security guards arrived. They opened fire on the planes. The ambush was swift and brutal. Congressman Lee Ryan was shot and killed on the tarmac. 3 journalists and one of the defectors were also murdered. The point of no return had been crossed. Back at the settlement, Jones initiated his final, horrific plan. He called everyone to the central pavilion, his voice laced with rage and paranoia. He told them that because of this betrayal, their utopian dream was over, and that soldiers would now come to torture their children and destroy everything they had built. He declared it to be the time for a revolutionary suicide. Vats of grape-flavored beverage, laced with a deadly mixture of cyanide and sedatives, were brought out. The final, chilling hour of the People's Temple is preserved on an FBI audio recording. You can hear the cries of children, the desperate pleas of those who resisted, and the unwavering voice of Jim Jones commanding his flock to die with him. While some were true believers who drank willingly, many were forced at gunpoint. The children were the first to die, their parents squirting the poison into their mouths with syringes. By the time Guyanese troops arrived the next day, the settlement was silent. More than 900 people lay dead, including over 300 children and infants. It remains one of the largest mass murder-suicides in modern history. The Jonestown tragedy is often dismissed as the act of a charismatic madman, but it was also the catastrophic conclusion of a social experiment that unfolded over years in plain sight.
It was a movement that weaponized the noble human desires for community, equality, and purpose. It is a chilling, timeless lesson in how the search for utopia can be twisted into a mechanism of absolute control, and how a dream of paradise can descend into the deepest darkness imaginable.
In the heart of Alaska, far from the bustling cities of the modern world, lies a wilderness of breathtaking scale. It's a land of sprawling forests, towering mountains, and skies that dance with the ethereal, cosmic light of the aurora borealis. This is a place where nature is in charge. But deep in this remote landscape, near the small town of Gakona, stands something entirely unnatural. It rises from the earth like a strange metallic forest, a perfectly uniform grid of 180 towering aluminum antennas, each 72 feet tall, spread across 30 acres of cleared land. This is the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, better known to the world as HAARP. Officially, HAARP is a scientific research facility, a window into one of Earth's most mysterious regions, the ionosphere. This is the electrically charged upper layer of our atmosphere, a dynamic and volatile sea of particles that shields us from cosmic radiation and makes long-distance radio communication possible. The official purpose of HAARP is to study that region, to understand it better. Its powerful array of antennas is designed to focus a beam of energy, to temporarily and harmlessly excite a small patch of the ionosphere, like a scientist tapping on a bell to hear how it rings. But this facility, born from the minds of military planners and shrouded in the secrecy of the Alaskan wilderness, has become the subject of intense fear and speculation for decades, because many believe that its true purpose is not just to study the sky, but to control it. The program was the brainchild of the U.S. Air Force, the Navy, and DARPA, the Pentagon's Advanced Research Agency. The goal was to understand how to better communicate with submarines, how to see over the horizon, and how to master the atmospheric battlefield. The technology is, in essence, a massive magnifying glass for radio waves. It focuses billions of watts of power into the sky, heating the ionosphere to create a temporary artificial bubble of plasma. And when you fire that much energy into the sky, strange things begin to happen. For years, local residents, bush pilots, and amateur observers in the region have reported a bizarre symphony of unexplained phenomena, often coinciding with HAARP's active transmission periods. They speak of strange, aurora-like lights that appear in the sky when there should be none, lights that are sometimes geometric in shape, glowing with an unnatural green or red hue. They describe a deep, pervasive low-frequency hum that seems to emanate not from a machine on the ground, but from the air itself, a vibration you feel in your bones. There are documented photographs of bizarre and unnatural cloud formations, of perfect, circular holes punched through a solid layer of overcast sky directly over the facility. Scientists associated with the project patiently explain these events as the expected and harmless side effects of heating the ionosphere. But for critics, these strange anomalies are not side effects. They are demonstrations of a terrifying and clandestine power. They believe the official story is just a cover for one of the most versatile and dangerous weapons systems ever created. The turning point for public suspicion, the moment HAARP went from a local curiosity to a global conspiracy, came not from a government press conference, but from researchers digging through the U.S. Patent Office.
There they found the work of physicist Dr. Bernard Eastland. Eastland held the original patents upon which much of HAARP's technology is based, and what these patents describe is not a simple research instrument. They describe a blueprint for a weapon of almost unimaginable power. The patents outline a method for creating, and I quote, unprecedented amounts of power in strategic regions of the Earth. They explicitly detail how this technology could be used to disrupt or even completely shut down all communications, radio, television, public utilities over vast portions of the planet. They describe how it could be used to interfere with the flight of missiles or to disable satellites in orbit. And most chillingly of all, the patents describe a system capable of weather modification on a global scale, of altering weather patterns, redirecting the jet stream, or manipulating the electrical storms that fuel our planet's climate. These are not the wild claims of conspiracy theorists. They are the documented, patented capabilities envisioned by the technology's own creator. When confronted with these patents, the government has consistently denied that HAARP has any such purpose or capability. They claim its power is far too weak for such feats. But the disconnect between the official benign story and the documented weaponized potential has created a deep and lasting mistrust. In 2014, the Air Force announced it was officially shutting down the HAARP project, citing budget cuts. For a moment, it seemed the story was over, but it was a feint. The following year, control of the massive facility was transferred to the University of Alaska Fairbanks, which now operates it for academic and private research. The forest of antennas in Gakona is still active. It still fires its immense power into the heavens. The official narrative is now of open academic inquiry, but the questions remain, hanging in the cold Alaskan air. Is HAARP truly just a university tool, a simple window into the sky? Or was this transfer merely a clever rebranding, a way to move a controversial military weapons system into a less scrutinized civilian guise? We are left to wonder. When we see strange lights in the sky, or when the weather takes an unnatural turn, is it the work of Mother Nature, or is it the echo of a secret experiment? The forest of antennas stands silent, its true purpose still a mystery, a powerful and unsettling reminder that sometimes the greatest power is the power you can't see.
History is filled with the stories of governments that have committed terrible acts. But few have ever directed the full power of their scientific and military establishments to create weapons with a goal so sinister, so ideologically twisted as South Africa's apartheid regime. In the final, desperate years of its existence, as the world's condemnation grew and the fires of rebellion burned brighter at home, the white minority government sanctioned a top-secret program to create a new kind of arsenal. It was a program to develop chemical and biological weapons designed not just for a battlefield, but for quiet, untraceable assassinations and the suppression of its own black population. They called it Project Coast, but to those who would uncover its secrets, it was nothing less than state-sanctioned evil. To understand Project Coast, you have to understand the mentality of the late apartheid state. It was a fortress of fear. The white minority government was obsessed with maintaining its grip on power, haunted by the specter of a full-scale race war. To preserve their system of brutal racial segregation, they believed that any method was justified. In 1981, they turned to one of the country's most brilliant and ambitious cardiologists, Dr. Wouter Basson. Basson,
a man who would later earn the nickname Dr. Death, was given a virtually unlimited budget and a secret mandate to lead Project Coast and create a hidden arsenal for the regime's defense. The program's official purpose was defensive research. Its true purpose was to develop the tools of oppression and murder. Operating from secret laboratories, Basson and his team of scientists began their work. What they created was the stuff of nightmares, a catalog of horrors designed to kill in ways that were silent, subtle, and terrifyingly intimate. This was not about building bombs. It was about weaponizing the mundane. Testimony later presented to South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission painted a horrifying picture. Scientists worked on lacing sugar cubes with salmonella. They developed a method for putting poison on the adhesive strips of envelopes so that a target would ingest it simply by licking the seal. They filled cigarettes with anthrax, turning a common habit into a potential death sentence. They created untraceable poisons that could be smeared on the steering wheel of a car to be absorbed through the skin. They developed weaponized tear gas and produced thousands of doses of street drugs like mandrax and ecstasy to be used to disorient and control crowds during protests. But the most chilling objective of Project Coast was its search for the ultimate tool of apartheid ideology, a race-specific biological weapon. Dr. Basson and his team were tasked with investigating the possibility of creating a bacteria or virus that could target and affect only black people. They researched genetic differences between races, searching for a unique biological marker they could exploit. Their goal was to create a weapon that could sterilize black women without their knowledge, a silent, creeping genocide designed to win a war of demographics. While they never perfected such a weapon, the very fact that it was a well-funded state-sanctioned research goal reveals the truly diabolical nature of the program. This was not just military strategy, it was the scientific manifestation of racial hatred, an attempt to encode the brutal logic of apartheid into a living organism. For over a decade, these weapons were not just theoretical. Former operatives came forward to testify how they used the tools of Project Coast to eliminate anti-apartheid activists and political opponents. These assassinations were designed to look like accidents or natural deaths, a heart attack here, a sudden illness there, all part of the state's secret war against those fighting for freedom. In the early 1990s, the fortress of apartheid finally began to crumble. With the release of Nelson Mandela and the dawn of a new democratic South Africa on the horizon, the architects of Project Coast scrambled to bury their secrets. A massive cover-up operation went into effect. Tons of incriminating documents were shredded and burned. Caches of chemical weapons and precursors were allegedly dumped into oceans and rivers. They tried to erase the program from history, but they failed. The new government's Truth and Reconciliation Commission uncovered the broad strokes of the program, and in 1997, Dr. Wouter Basson himself was arrested. His trial would bring the horrifying details of Project Coast into the international spotlight. For months, the court heard testimony about poisoned sugar, anthrax cigarettes, and the secret search for a race-based plague. The world watched, expecting a swift conviction for one of the architects of apartheid's darkest chapter. But the conclusion to the story was as shocking as the project itself. In 2002, after a lengthy trial, a judge acquitted Wouter Basson on all 46 charges against him, including murder, fraud, and drug trafficking. The judge ruled that the state had failed to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt, and that Basson's actions were not illegal because he was acting as a soldier for the state. Dr. Death walked free. the man who spearheaded a program to build race-specific weapons and create tools for untraceable assassinations, would face no prison time for his role. Project Coast stands as one of history's most terrifying and documented examples of science being twisted into a tool of oppression. It is a chilling story of a government that, in its desperation to preserve a system of hate, was willing to poison its own people and unleash a plague upon the world. And it is a profound and disturbing reminder that sometimes, in the courts of men, the most monstrous crimes go unpunished.
Deep beneath the crushing, silent darkness of the world's oceans, a steel ghost glides through the abyss. It is a nuclear-powered submarine, a hunter-killer holding the destructive power of 100 cities in its belly. It is one of America's ultimate weapons, its greatest deterrent. Its power lies in one simple fact: it cannot be found. But this strength is also its greatest weakness, because in the unforgiving depths, cut off from the sun, the sky, and the world above, the submarine is also deaf. Traditional radio waves, the kind that carry our television shows and phone calls, are powerless here. They are absorbed by saltwater almost instantly, rendering them useless just a few feet below the surface. During the height of the Cold War, this created a terrifying paradox for the United States military. How do you command a fleet of invisible, world-ending weapons if you cannot speak to them? How do you give the order to launch, or just as importantly, the order not to launch, to a crew that is completely isolated from the chain of command? The Navy needed a solution. They needed a ray to whisper a message through the entire planet. The answer was a government project of almost unbelievable scale and audacity, a secret technology that would turn the very crust of the Earth into a giant antenna, sending a silent, unstoppable wave through solid rock and deep ocean to reach their hidden fleet. Its first name was Project Sanguine. The science behind Project Sanguine was as ambitious as it was brilliant. The concept was called Extremely Low Frequency, or ELF, radio. Unlike high-frequency waves that bounce and scatter, an ELF wave is immensely long and powerful. It's less of a ripple and more of a massive planetary swell that can penetrate almost any obstacle. But to create such a wave, you need an antenna of a truly gargantuan size. You couldn't just build one. You had to merge it with the geology of the Earth itself. Navy scientists scoured the country for the perfect location. They needed a specific type of ancient, stable, and low-conductivity rock. They found it in the dense granite bedrock of the Laurentian Shield, deep beneath the vast whispering woods of Wisconsin's Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Here, beginning in 1968, the Navy began a construction project unlike any other in history, all while telling the public it was simply for electrical research. They carved two massive perpendicular lines through the forest. One antenna, located in Wisconsin, was 28 miles long. The other, in Michigan, was a staggering 56 miles long.
They weren't wires hung on poles, but massive cables buried deep in the ground, connected by thousands of tons of copper and grounded directly into the granite shield. The system worked by pumping enormous amounts of electricity into these grounded antennas. The current didn't just flow through the wires, it saturated the bedrock itself, turning a huge swath of North America into one colossal transmitter. From this subterranean nerve center, the Navy could now generate a silent, continuous wave, a one-way message, a simple string of code that could be received by any submerged U.S. submarine anywhere on the globe. The whisper from the woods of Wisconsin could be heard in the deepest trenches of the Pacific. For the people living in the small rural communities scattered throughout the forest, the project was a source of quiet speculation. The official story was vague, and the intense security surrounding the sites felt like more than was needed for simple research. As the years went on and the system began its secret operations, strange things started to happen. Locals began to share unsettling stories. They spoke of an invisible energy that seemed to hang in the air. Farmers reported that their metal fences would sometimes carry a current, delivering a sharp, tingling shock to the touch. People living directly over the antenna paths claimed their lights would flicker in unison, and that fluorescent bulbs brought near the ground would glow eerily without being plugged into anything. Telephone conversations would be interrupted by a strange, low-frequency hum. As details about the true nature of Project Sanguine slowly leaked out, these strange anecdotes fueled a growing wave of public concern. Environmental groups and activists began to ask serious questions. What was the long-term effect of bathing hundreds of square miles of wilderness in constant, extremely low-frequency radiation? Was it safe for the wildlife? And most importantly, was it safe for the people who lived, worked, and raised their families on top of this giant, secret machine? The government's response was always the same. The system was perfectly safe. The energy levels were too low to cause any harm. But the deep-seated secrecy that had shrouded the project from its inception had bred a powerful mistrust. For decades, a quiet battle was waged between the concerned citizens of Wisconsin and the invisible, silent power of the U.S. Navy. It was a protest against a technology most people couldn't see, and whose true purpose was tied to a war they hoped would never come. For over 30 years, the ELF system operated, a silent and faithful instrument of Cold War strategy, humming deep beneath the forest floor. It was a technological marvel and a testament to the extremes of military innovation. It kept the lines of communication open to the nation's most powerful deterrents, a steady pulse in the dark. Then, in 2004, almost as quietly as it began, it ended. The Navy announced that the ELF transmitter facility was being decommissioned. Newer, more advanced communication technologies, they explained, had made the massive system obsolete. The antennas were dismantled, the sites were remediated, and the land was returned to the U.S. Forest Service. But the legacy of Project Sanguine lingers. It stands as one of the most powerful examples of a secret government technology operating on a planetary scale, hidden in plain sight from the American public. Its closure leaves behind a trail of unsettling questions. Was the system truly shut down because it was obsolete? Or was it replaced by something even more advanced, even more secret? After decades of soaking the Earth in ELF waves, what were the true long-term effects on the environment and its inhabitants? The silent waves from the woods of Wisconsin may have ceased, but the story serves as a chilling reminder. In the name of national security, we have built wonders that are nearly invisible to us, and it forces us to wonder what other colossal secrets might be humming right now, just beneath our feet.
In 1974, humanity decided to shout into the cosmic darkness. From the jungles of Puerto Rico, at the world's largest and most powerful radio telescope, we gathered all our hope, our science, and our sense of self, and we beamed it into the void. It was a message in a bottle, thrown into an ocean of stars. It was a declaration that, on a small watery planet in a forgotten corner of the galaxy, a thinking species had emerged. We never expected a reply. The target was 25,000 light-years away. It was a symbolic act, a digital cave painting for the cosmos. But 27 years later, in a quiet wheat field in England, next to another secure government observatory, something impossible appeared. It was a complex and beautiful pattern woven into the crops, and when it was decoded, it appeared to be nothing less than a direct, point-by-point response to the message we had sent. This is the story of the Arecibo message and its chilling, anomalous reply. Let's go back to November 16th, 1974. At the Arecibo Observatory, a team of astronomers, including the legendary Carl Sagan and Frank Drake, had crafted a message. It was a simple pictogram made of 1,679 binary pulses. When arranged in a grid, it formed a visual greeting card from Earth. It was brilliantly simple, designed to be universally understood by any intelligent life that might receive it. First, it showed the numbers 1 through 10 to establish a common mathematical language. Then, it listed the atomic numbers for the 5 key elements of life on Earth: hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and phosphorus. It detailed the chemical formulas for the sugars and bases in our DNA. Below that was a graphical representation of the DNA double helix itself, and in the center, a simple stick figure-like drawing of a human being, with our average height and the population of Earth at the time. Finally, it showed a diagram of our solar system, with Earth offset to show where we lived, and a graphic of the Arecibo telescope used to send the message. For 3 minutes, the telescope blasted this message towards N13, a globular star cluster in the constellation of Hercules. And then there was silence. The message was gone, hurtling through space at the speed of light. For decades, it was a feel-good footnote in the history of astronomy, a symbol of our own curiosity. Now, fast forward 27 years to August 2001. The location is Hampshire, England. Next to the Chilbolton Radio Telescope Observatory, a secure government facility, a strange formation appears in a field of wheat. It is a haunting, complex image of a humanoid face, intricately woven into the crops. It's stunning and becomes an instant classic in the world of crop circle research. But it was just the prelude. 3 days later,
The field next to the face was updated. A new, massive rectangular pattern had been laid down overnight with a precision that defied explanation. To the casual observer, it was just another complex geometric design. But to the researchers who knew the history of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, it was a thunderbolt. The pattern was unmistakably familiar. It was the exact same binary grid format as the 1974 Arecibo message. But the message itself had been changed. It was a reply. Let's decode this impossible message, point by point, just as the researchers did. The numbers 1 through 10 were identical. The universal language was established. They understood our math. The section on the elements of life, however, was different. Our message had listed 5 elements. The reply had the same 5, but a 6th had been added: silicon, an element with an atomic number of 14. The DNA double helix was there, but its structure was subtly different. The graphic showing the number of nucleotides in our DNA was changed to a new, larger number. The message seemed to be describing a different and perhaps more complex genetic makeup. And then, the human figure. Our simple stick figure was gone. In its place was the now iconic image of a gray alien, a short body with a massive bulbous head. The height indicated was roughly 3.5 feet, and the population figure was changed to a number far larger than our own. The solar system diagram was also altered. It still showed 9 planets, but this time 3 of them were offset from the sun: Earth, Mars, and another, which appeared to be one of the moons of Jupiter, depicted with 4 small moons of its own. The message seemed to imply that their civilization occupied multiple worlds in our own solar system. And finally, the drawing of the Arecibo telescope that we had sent was replaced with something else entirely. It was a diagram of a complex, multi-layered flower-like object, a depiction, perhaps, of the very technology they used to create the message itself. So, what are we to make of this? The official explanation, or rather the official silence from the scientific community, defaults to the only rational conclusion. It was a hoax, an incredibly brilliant, sophisticated, and flawlessly executed hoax, created by anonymous human artists. But that explanation comes with its own difficult questions. How did a team of hoaxers create a pattern of such mathematical complexity and scale, overnight in a field directly adjacent to a secure 24/7 government observatory, without leaving a single footprint or trace of their work? Who possessed the resources and the genius to create such a profound piece of data art, only to never ever claim credit for it? The Chilbolton reply is not just a crop circle. It is a direct and intelligent response to a message that we, through a government-funded program, sent to the stars. It speaks our language, the language of math and science. It remains one of the most compelling and unsettling anomalies of our time. It leaves us with 2 possibilities. Either it is the single most elaborate and intellectually profound prank ever perpetrated in human history, or it is exactly what it appears to be, a return postcard delivered to our doorstep from someone else out there in the cosmic dark.
In the vast, high desert of western Utah, there is a place of stark and silent beauty. It's called Skull Valley. It's a land of sweeping plains, rugged mountains, and a sky so wide
it can feel like you're standing on the edge of the world. For generations, this has been the domain of ranchers, tough, pragmatic people who know the land, the weather, and their animals with an intimacy born of hard work and survival. But on the horizon of this quiet valley looms a neighbor of a very different kind. A place of high fences, guarded gates, and profound secrecy. This is the Dugway Proving Ground, a sprawling 800,000-acre military base. It is here, in this isolated corner of America, that the U.S. Army tests its most dangerous and terrifying creations, a deadly arsenal of chemical and biological weapons. For decades, the ranchers of Skull Valley lived in a state of quiet coexistence with their ominous neighbor. They were used to the distant rumbles of explosions and the faint trails of jets slicing across the sky. It was the sound of national security. But on March 17, 1968, a silent, invisible predator would escape the confines of the proving ground, and the ranchers would come face to face with the horrifying truth of what was being cooked up just over the hill. The morning of March 17, 1968, began like any other. Ranchers set out to check on their herds of sheep, which were grazing peacefully in the valley's winter pastures. But what they found was a scene of utter, baffling devastation. They found their sheep dead. Not one or two felled by a coyote or a harsh winter night. They found entire herds lying motionless in the snow, hundreds of them scattered across the landscape as if they had simply dropped where they stood. There were no tracks, no predators, and most chillingly, no outward signs of injury or struggle. They just looked asleep. As the day wore on, the scale of the disaster became terrifyingly clear. The count climbed from hundreds to 1,000 to over 6,000 sheep, all dead or dying. The ranchers, who had seen everything this harsh land could throw at them, knew instantly that this was not natural. They reported it to local authorities, and soon the army from Dugway was on the scene. Their response was swift, confident, and dismissive. The official statement was that the sheep had likely been poisoned by eating locoweed, a native poisonous plant made more desperate by a particularly harsh winter. It was a local problem, they insisted. It had nothing to do with the proving ground. But the ranchers weren't buying it. They knew what poisonous plants did to their animals. This was different. Eyewitnesses described a disturbing consistency in the animals' final moments. Some were paralyzed but still breathing, their eyes wide. Others stumbled in circles, lost all control of their bodies, and collapsed into violent convulsions before dying. This wasn't poison from a plant. This looked like something else entirely. A local veterinarian, Dr. D.A. Oglethorpe, was called in to perform necropsies on the dead animals. What he found inside them was the first piece of hard evidence that would unravel the government story. The internal organs were damaged, but most importantly, the blood of the dead sheep was a strange, bright, cherry red color. It also failed to clot properly. To a trained toxicologist, these were the classic, textbook signs of poisoning by a powerful, fast-acting nerve agent, a chemical that attacks the nervous system and causes death by asphyxiation.
The evidence on the ground was now in direct, undeniable conflict with the official story from the Army. On one side, you had generations of local knowledge and hard scientific evidence. On the other, you had a flat denial from one of the nation's most secretive military installations. The story created a media firestorm, and the government found itself backed into a corner. The truth would not come from an official press conference. It came, as it so often does in these cases, from a leak. An insider, risking their career, passed a secret government report to a member of Congress, who in turn released it to the press. The document was a bombshell. It revealed that on March 13th, just one day before the sheep began dying, a high-altitude test of a chemical weapon had taken place at Dugway. An F-4 Phantom jet had flown a mission to disperse a nerve agent over a specified target grid. The chemical being tested was VX. VX is one of the most toxic and persistent nerve agents ever synthesized by mankind. A single tiny droplet absorbed through the skin is enough to kill an adult human. The leaked report detailed a catastrophic malfunction. As the jet sprayed the VX, one of its dispersal tanks failed to close properly. It continued to leak the deadly invisible chemical as the jet climbed in altitude. The wind did the rest. A small, silent mist of pure poison drifted off the proving ground, over the fences, and settled gently upon the snowy pastures of Skull Valley below, where thousands of sheep were peacefully grazing. Caught in an undeniable lie, the U.S. Army was forced to abandon its story about poisonous weeds. While they never formally admitted guilt or responsibility for the incident, their actions spoke louder than words. They quietly paid the local ranchers nearly $1 million in compensation for their lost livestock. It was a tacit admission of the horrifying truth. The Dugway sheep incident became a landmark moment. It was a chilling, real-world demonstration of the incredible danger posed by chemical weapons research. But the story leaves us with a legacy of fear that goes far beyond the remote valleys of Utah. The amount of VX that killed over 6,000 sheep, 6,000 living, breathing animals, was estimated to be less than 20 gallons, an amount that could fit in the trunk of a car. It raises the terrifying and inescapable question: if this is what happened when a small accident occurred over a desolate valley, how many other tests have gone wrong? And how close have we come, or are we coming now, to a similar malfunction happening not over an empty pasture, but over the populated towns and cities we call home?
In the vast, arid expanse of eastern Washington, where the sagebrush plains stretch to meet a boundless sky, the land is marked by a silent giant. It is a place of stark, imposing concrete and towering smokestacks that seem to pierce the very heavens. This is the Hanford Site, a name whispered with a mix of national pride and a deep, unspoken fear. Born from the urgency of the Second World War, Hanford was a linchpin of the Manhattan Project, a secret city dedicated to a single, world-altering purpose: producing plutonium. After the bombs fell and the war ended, its work did not cease. As the world slid into the icy grip of the Cold War, Hanford's mission only intensified. It became the heart of America's nuclear arsenal, a silent guardian churning out the raw material for atomic weapons, operating under a thick veil of national security. Downwind from this industrial behemoth, life followed a different rhythm. In the fertile Yakima Valley and the quiet city of Spokane, communities thrived. Farmers tilled their fields, mothers hung laundry in the crisp desert air, and children played in schoolyards, their lives underscored by the distant, unseen hum of industry. They were patriots, living in the shadow of a facility that protected their nation. They trusted the men in charge. They had no reason not to. But in the winter of 1949, that trust was about to be betrayed in the most profound way imaginable. A secret was about to be carried on the wind, an invisible, odorless poison deliberately released by the United States government upon its own unsuspecting citizens. It was an experiment, a test. They called it the Green Run. The official objective sounded rational, almost mundane when read from a government memo. The Cold War was a war of secrets and surveillance. The United States needed to know what the Soviets were doing, specifically how to detect the telltale signs of their nuclear production. To do that, they needed to understand their own atomic signature. They needed a baseline, a radiological fingerprint to study. The plan was to create a controlled release of radioactive material and use highly sensitive equipment to track its dispersal. The experiment was codenamed the Green Run for a deceptively simple reason. In nuclear processing, uranium fuel rods are typically left to cool for months after being used in a reactor. This allows the most volatile and dangerous short-lived isotopes to decay, making the material safer to handle. But for this test, scientists at Hanford were instructed to process greener fuel rods, rods that had been cooling for only 16 days. This decision was critical. These fresher rods were intensely radioactive, packed with a witch's brew of fission products. Among them, in dangerously high concentrations, was a substance known as iodine-131. Iodine-131 is a particularly insidious threat. The human body can't distinguish it from regular stable iodine. When inhaled or ingested, it is drawn directly to the thyroid gland in the neck. There, it settles in, bombarding the delicate surrounding tissues with beta and gamma radiation, day after day, a silent traitor working from within. Under normal circumstances, Hanford's processing plants were equipped with filtration systems, scrubbers designed to capture the vast majority of these dangerous emissions before they could escape. But for the Green Run, safety was not the primary concern. Data was. To get the purest possible reading of the plume, a fateful order was given. The filters were to be intentionally bypassed. On the night of December 2nd, 1949, inside the cavernous, echoing walls of Hanford's tea plant, the experiment began. The green uranium was dissolved in acid, and a dense, invisible cloud of radioactive gas began its journey up a 200-foot smokestack. For 2 days, the facility bled poison into the sky. No alarms sounded. No public warnings were issued. The only record of the event
was the dispassionate scratching of pens in classified logbooks and the flickering needles on radiation monitoring equipment. Estimates are that roughly 8,000 curies of iodine-131 were released. To put that in perspective, the infamous 3 Mile Island accident in 1979, an event that sparked national panic, released just 15 curies. The radioactive plume, a ghost riding the winter wind, drifted silently southeast from Hanford. It blanketed hundreds of square miles, dusting farms, rivers, homes, and people with its invisible fallout. It settled on the grass that dairy cows would eat, concentrating the poison that would later be passed on in their milk that would be drunk by the children of Spokane and the Tri-Cities area. The danger was real, but it could not be seen, smelled, or tasted. It was the perfect secret. For decades, the secret held. Life downwind continued, but a strange and tragic pattern began to emerge in the communities surrounding Hanford. Doctors noted statistically improbable clusters of thyroid cancer, goiters, and other endocrine disorders. Farmers reported an alarming number of miscarriages and birth defects among their livestock. Families whispered about the Hanford flu, a mysterious illness that seemed to follow them through generations. There were theories and suspicions, but no proof. The government and the contractors at Hanford consistently denied that the plant posed any risk to the public. The illnesses they suggested were a sad coincidence. The truth remained buried in classified archives, gathering dust for nearly 40 years. The turning point came not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of paper. In 1986, facing relentless pressure from journalists and concerned citizens, the Department of Energy was forced to declassify thousands of historical documents from the Hanford Site. For the people who had lived their entire lives downwind, the revelation was a body blow. Paging through the dry, technical reports, they found it, the complete, horrifying details of the Green Run. They learned they had not been neighbors to a potential hazard. They had been the unwitting subjects of a massive, secret radiological experiment. The shockwave of this discovery was immense. The clusters of cancer and thyroid disease suddenly had a potential name. The generational sickness was no longer a mystery, but a potential consequence. The people who had trusted their government to protect them were now confronted with the chilling reality that they had been used as human guinea pigs. They were given a new name, the Downwinders. In the years that followed, the official government stance remained largely unchanged. While admitting the Green Run took place, they maintained that the radiation doses received by the public were too low to have caused the widespread health effects claimed by the Downwinders. Proving direct causation in a court of law became a heartbreaking and often impossible battle. How do you prove that one specific case of cancer was caused by an invisible cloud from decades ago and not by genetics or other environmental factors? For the Downwinders, the fight was never just about financial compensation. It was about accountability. It was about the truth. The Green Run shattered the sacred trust between a government and its people, leaving a permanent scar on the community. Today, the Hanford Site is the focus of the largest environmental cleanup project in the world, a multi-billion-dollar effort to contain the toxic
The year is 1947. America is riding a wave of post-war optimism, building new homes, new families, and a new future. The skies, once filled with the roar of warplanes, are now a symbol of peace and progress. But in the serene waters of the Pacific Northwest, something new was about to appear in those skies, something that would set the stage for decades of mystery and mistrust. Most people associate the summer of '47 with the legendary crash at Roswell, New Mexico. But weeks before that name ever entered the public consciousness, a strange and tragic series of events unfolded near Maury Island, Washington. It was an incident involving strange flying craft, mysterious men in black, and the sudden deaths of 2 military intelligence officers. It may very well be the first and most important modern UFO cover-up in American history. June 21, 1947, was a calm, unremarkable day on Puget Sound. Harold Dahl, a harbor patrolman, was navigating his patrol boat across the placid water. With him were his son, Charles, his son's friend, and their dog. The gentle hum of the boat's engine was the only sound breaking the peaceful silence. Then they looked up. Hanging silently in the sky above them were 6 massive objects. Dahl would later describe them as being donut-shaped, each about 100 feet in diameter, with a gleaming metallic surface that reflected the afternoon sun. They made no sound, moving with an eerie, unnatural grace. 5 of the craft hovered in a wide formation, while the 6th appeared to be in trouble, losing altitude and struggling to maintain its position. As Dahl and his son watched, mesmerized, one of the other craft descended toward the ailing one, as if attempting to render aid. The 2 objects touched. What happened next shattered the day's tranquility. There was no loud bang, but a dull, concussive thump echoed from the troubled craft. It began to spew a shower of debris, raining down thousands of dark metallic fragments that hissed as they hit the water. Dahl scrambled for control of his boat as the strange, slag-like material rained from the sky. The deck was pelted with the hot metal, which sizzled and burned the wood. A piece of the debris struck his son Charles on the arm, leaving a significant burn. Tragically, their dog was struck and killed instantly. As chaos erupted on the boat, Dahl had the presence of mind to grab his camera, snapping several pictures of the objects before they silently, and with incredible speed, ascended into the clouds and vanished. Shaken and confused, Dahl returned to shore with a damaged boat, an injured son, and a story that defied belief. But the strangeness was only just beginning. The next morning, Dahl claimed he received a visitor. A man dressed in a pristine black suit pulled up alongside him in a brand new black 1947 Buick sedan. Dahl said the man's demeanor was cold and official. He invited Dahl to breakfast at a nearby diner, and what he said next chilled Dahl to the bone. The stranger knew every single detail of the previous day's events, details Dahl hadn't yet told anyone. The man in black described the sighting, the falling debris, and the injury to his son with chillingly precise accuracy. Then came the warning. The stranger, vaguely but firmly, advised Dahl that it would be best for him and his family if he simply forgot what he saw. Speaking about it, he implied, would only lead to trouble. This encounter would later be recognized by historians of the strange as one of the very first documented appearances of the now infamous Men in Black in UFO lore. Dahl, though intimidated, eventually spoke to his associate Fred Krisman. The story soon found its way to an editor at a Chicago magazine who, in turn, passed it along to Kenneth Arnold, the very same pilot
whose own sighting of 9 flying saucers over Mount Rainier just 3 days after Dahl's incident would soon make national headlines. Intrigued by the similarities and the physical evidence Dahl claimed to have, Arnold decided this was something the authorities needed to see. He contacted the United States Army Air Forces. The military took it seriously enough to dispatch 2 intelligence officers from Hamilton Field in California, Captain William Davidson and Lieutenant Frank Brown. The 2 officers flew to Tacoma, Washington, presenting themselves as men on a mission. They were professional, sharp, and skeptical, but they listened intently as they interviewed both Dahl and Crisman. They were shown the boat's damage, and most importantly, they were given a box filled with the strange metallic fragments that had fallen from the sky. After completing their interviews, the officers had what they came for: eyewitness testimony and physical evidence from a highly credible and deeply strange event. They loaded their findings onto their B-25 bomber at McCord Field, ready to fly the evidence back to their base for analysis. That analysis would never happen. Shortly after takeoff on August 1st, 1947, the left engine of Captain Davidson and Lieutenant Brown's B-25 bomber burst into flames. The plane spiraled out of control and crashed in a fiery wreck near Kelso, Washington. Both officers, the only 2 men tasked with investigating the Maury Island Incident, were killed. The official Air Force explanation was swift and decisive. It was a routine engine fire, a tragic but unremarkable accident. A local newspaper later reported that a mysterious anonymous caller had informed them that the B-25 was carrying secret cargo from Maury Island and had been shot down. This claim was never substantiated. The FBI, which had also opened a file on the case, quickly concluded that Dahl and Crisman's entire story was a hoax. They declared the strange debris to be nothing more than ordinary slag from a local smelting plant. The case was officially closed. But for those who looked closer, the official story felt too neat, too convenient. How could a simple hoax accidentally lead to the deaths of 2 military intelligence officers? If the debris was just worthless slag, why were 2 specialists sent to retrieve it? And what about the man in black? The Maury Island Incident leaves us with a profound and disturbing mystery. Was it, as the government insists, a tall tale told by 2 patrolmen that spiraled into a coincidental tragedy? Or was it something far more significant? Was it a genuine encounter with an unknown technology, followed by a deliberate and lethal effort to silence the story and bury the evidence, making Captain Davidson and Lieutenant Brown the first casualties of a new, secret war for the truth? The answers, it seems, were lost in the fire.
In the Cold War, the front lines were everywhere. They weren't just in the divided streets of Berlin or the jungles of Vietnam. They were in the quiet, carpeted hallways of embassies, in the coded whispers of diplomats, and in the invisible spaces between radio frequencies. The war was a contest of secrets and shadows. But for over 2 decades, inside the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, America was the target of an attack so silent, so persistent, and so strange, it remains one of the most chilling mysteries of the era. This was a new kind of weapon. It couldn't be seen, heard, or felt. It passed through stone walls as if they were air. It was a focused, directed beam of energy, bathing the entire embassy in a constant stream of microwaves, day after day, year after year. The Soviets never admitted to it, and for years, the U.S. government didn't even tell its own people they were under attack. This is the story of the Moscow Signal. The U.S. Embassy on Tchaikovsky Street in Moscow was the nerve center of American operations in the heart of the Soviet Empire. It was a prestigious diplomatic post, but it was also a gilded cage, a bubble of American life under the constant, watchful eye of the KGB. Every conversation was assumed to be monitored, every move tracked. But in 1953, American intelligence analysts discovered something far more invasive than a hidden microphone. During a routine sweep for background radiation, a technician saw something that didn't make sense. There was a persistent, low-level beam of microwave radiation focused directly on the embassy, specifically targeting the ambassador's office on the 10th floor. The energy levels were low, not enough to cook anything, but they were constant, and they were clearly artificial. The source was quickly traced to a series of antennas on the roof of a nearby Soviet apartment building. The silent, invisible siege had begun. The immediate fear within the CIA was that this was a new, sophisticated form of eavesdropping. Perhaps the microwaves were being used to power or activate listening devices hidden deep within the embassy's walls. But as the years went on, a second, far more disturbing theory began to take hold. What if the target wasn't the embassy's secrets, but the bodies and minds of the people working inside? What if the Soviets were conducting a long-term, unethical medical experiment on the biological effects of microwave radiation using American diplomats as their unwitting lab rats? Inside the embassy walls, life went on. Ambassadors and their staff worked, families were raised, and children played in the courtyard, all while being continuously bathed in the strange, invisible energy. And slowly, reports of unexplained health problems began to surface. Staff members complained of persistent headaches, chronic fatigue, memory loss, and a strange dizzying sensation in their eyes. There were reports of bleeding gums and strange blood conditions. The anecdotal evidence became impossible to ignore. 2 successive U.S. ambassadors who served in Moscow during the period of the signal, Charles Bolin and Walter Stossel, would later die of cancer. Stossel himself became so ill during his tenure in the 1970s that he suffered from bleeding eyes and other debilitating symptoms. Was it just a tragic coincidence, or was it the long-term result of living in the beam? While the diplomats and their families suffered in ignorance, the U.S. government was in a state of quiet panic. They knew their people were being irradiated, but revealing it publicly could cause a major international incident and mass panic among the diplomatic corps. So for years, they kept it a secret from their own employees. Behind the scenes, the CIA launched a top-secret program to understand the threat. It was codenamed Project Pandora. The goal was to study the Moscow signal and determine its true purpose. In a dark twist, the CIA began its own ethically questionable experiments, attempting to replicate the signal's effects on monkeys. They wanted to know, could these low-level microwaves be used for mind control? Could they be used to induce sickness, confusion, or even psychosis from a distance? The official results of Project Pandora were deemed inconclusive and remain heavily classified to this day. But the very existence of the program shows just how seriously the United States government took the threat of this invisible weapon. In 1976, more than 2 decades after it was first detected, the Moscow signal abruptly stopped. The Soviets never offered an explanation.
never admitted to its existence. Its true purpose remains a subject of intense debate. Was it a crude, brute force attempt at espionage? Was it a psychological warfare tactic designed to create paranoia and disrupt the embassy's functions? Or was it the darkest possibility of all, a cold-blooded, long-term scientific study of the effects of radiation on a captured human population? The Moscow signal stands as one of the first and most prolonged cases of a directed energy weapon being used against a U.S. target. It is a chilling reminder that the weapons of modern warfare are not always bombs and bullets. They can be silent, invisible, and their effects may not be fully understood until years or even decades have passed. It leaves us with the unsettling reality that you can be on a battlefield and not even know it, and that the deepest wounds are sometimes left by the ghosts you can't even see.